Matthias Cormann, welcome to ABC News 24.
Good to be here.
We'll start first with the government's decision to delay an increase in the tax-free threshold. It was due to deliver in 2015 because the carbon price that was aimed at compensating for won't be as high. If the government's done that, how can you continue to promise to keep much of the compensation when you'll be getting rid of the carbon price altogether?
Well, our policy all along has been that we would deliver income tax cuts without a carbon tax. I mean, the government is in complete chaos. The government, of course, is going from one broken promise after the other. The budget is in a mess. It is now clear to everyone that Wayne Swan's budget papers are just a complete work of fiction.
But Mr Abbott has characterised your promise as saying people will get to keep much of the compensation without the carbon tax. If the carbon tax is there, why do they need to keep much of the compensation?
Well, what we've said for a long time now is that we will fund income tax cuts without a carbon tax and a modest company tax cut without a mining tax. The Labor Party is in a complete mess. They've pursued a carbon tax which is bad for Australia, which is bad for families, which is bad for the economy, and which we always said would be bad for the budget, because we've always said that the carbon tax the carbon tax package was going to leave the budget worse off, even if it had raised what the government thought it would raise. And of course we've raised for a very long time concerns about the government's revenue assumptions for the carbon tax, because they were based on completely unrealistic, completely unbelievable assumptions that, for example, the carbon price in 2015-16 internationally would be $29 a tonne. We've known for a long time that this was just a complete lie and a complete fabrication by the current government.
Is your commitment still to deliver those income tax cuts in the first term of a coalition government?
Well, I don't know how many other ways I can put this to you. I mean, our policy for a long time has been to fund income tax cuts without a carbon tax and to deliver a modest company tax. Absolutely, that has been our commitment for a very long time. I mean, essentially what's happened today is that the government, the Labor Party, is in chaos because they were planning for the carbon tax to deliver revenue which is now not eventuating. We have never we've never developed our plans on the basis of an assumption that there would be revenue from the carbon tax. As you well know, because our commitment very clearly is to scrap the carbon tax, which is a bad tax for Australia.
But isn't that the same principle you're using to fund your paid parental leave with a 1.5% levy on company tax on the biggest companies, when the money from that levy is uncertain because company tax might fall, yet the spending you are basing the spending from that money is a fixed proportion of money?
Not at all. I mean, obviously in the lead up to the last election, we released our costings for our paid parental leave scheme. Paid parental leave, a fair dinkum paid parental leave scheme, is an important economic reform for Australia. It is important because it will help increase our productivity growth again. It will help us increase workforce participation by women. So we're very committed to it. In the lead up to the last election, we released our costings and we said it was based on a temporary 1.5% levy on the biggest companies, the 3,000 biggest companies across Australia, and that was in effect offset by a 1.5% across-the-board company tax cut. Now, in the lead up to the next election, we are still committed to that 1.5% temporary levy for the biggest companies across Australia, and we will also, of course, deliver a modest company tax cut, which will offset that in part. Now, the full costings in relation to that policy.
We know that company tax revenues haven't been growing by as much as has been forecast. Can you still say that levy you'll put on company tax will raise the money you need to pay for your paid parental leave scheme?
Well, we don't trust anything that Wayne Swan puts out into the public domain in terms of budget documents, in terms of budget updates. We will wait quite responsibly for the pre-election economic and fiscal update, which has to be delivered by the Secretaries of Treasury and Finance 10 days in from the election having been formally called. And so once we have that information, we will be finalising all of our judgments in relation to all of our pre-election costings, and we will be releasing releasing all of our pre-election costings, including in relation to the paid parental leave scheme, in good time before the next election, so that people can pass judgment in relation to those.
If the levy doesn't raise as much money as you had hoped, as much money as you will need, will you contemplate increasing the levy or taking money from consolidated revenue to fund your scheme?
Lyndal, that is a complete hypothetical. I mean, the truth is that right now nobody knows what the true state of the budget is today. Next Tuesday, we know that whatever budget document the Treasurer released is a work of fiction. Because if you look at every one of Wayne Swan's past budgets, they weren't worth the paper they were written on the next morning. And so what we will do, quite responsibly, is we will wait for the pre-election economic and fiscal outlook, which under the Charter of Budget Honesty has to be released objectively and independently by the Secretaries of Treasury and Finance. And once we've got that information about the true state of the budget, that's when we will make our final judgments on pre-election costings, including in relation to the paid parental leave scheme. And it will be released in good time before the next election, and people will be able to pass judgment in relation to that.
Do you really believe that the government takes the forecasts that Treasury puts up in terms of the budget and junks them and makes up its own?
I absolutely believe that this Treasurer has dishonestly overestimated the revenue that he expected to collect. Absolutely. I think that this Treasurer, as a matter of political strategy, has been aggressively optimistic in terms of his revenue expectations. He was wanting to make people believe in May last year that revenue this year would increase by nearly 12% at a time when the economy was expected to grow more slowly and at a time when the terms of trade were expected to fall. Now, if you go back to what we said this time last year, that is exactly the point that we made this time last year, that the Treasurer's revenue forecasts were unbelievable. I don't believe for one second that the Treasury Secretary agreed with the government's insistence that in 2015-16 the international price on carbon was going to be $29 a tonne. That was an assumption that was imposed on Treasury by the Labor government. And there are assumption after assumption across the budget papers that are imposed on Treasury by the government of the day. Treasury advises the government. It is Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan and Penny Wong who make the final decisions, and they've clearly made bad decisions in recent years, and bad decisions are now catching up with them.
Matthias Cormann, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.